Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're here for the first time, please like, share, and subscribe if you like my content. Today I'm going to be talking about the 1990 film Tremors. I absolutely love this movie, and I'm going to be listing the top 5 reasons why this movie is one of the best science fiction horror films ever made.
Oh, Jesus! What the hell's going on? What the hell is going on?
So if you don't know much about Tremors, it was released in January of 1990. It had a very low box office, wasn't much of a hit at all in theaters. I vaguely remember hearing about this movie before it came out, but I didn't actually see it until it was released on VHS in April of 1990. One of those weekends where your family goes to Blockbuster or whatever video store back then, rents a few movies. Hopefully one or two of them is actually good. We happened to pick up Tremors one weekend, watched it as a family, and I'm pretty sure all of us actually loved it. Not so much about my sister maybe, but I know I loved it. At the time that my family and I watched it, I was 12 years old. Perfect age for a movie like this. And you gotta remember, I grew up on action films, Schwarzenegger, stuff like Aliens, American Werewolf in London, They Live, movies like that. So I had a love for sci-fi and horror films. So let's start with reason number 1 why this movie is pretty much perfect and one of the best sci-fi horror films ever. It had a unique and original concept.
Move it! Hey, get out of there! Get off the ground! Move it! No, Nestor, that's no good! Come on, you gotta get higher!
Tremors is a movie that presents a completely original concept that had never been seen before. The idea of giant underground worms terrorizing a small desert town is unique and terrifying. The movie manages to create a completely original monster that is both believable and horrifying. So you have to remember that going into this, there was no YouTube and a lot of previews online or on TV. So if you didn't know much about the movie, you didn't know what the actual worms were, what they looked like really.
Yeah! Can you fly, you sucker? Can you fly?
Even the picture on the poster doesn't really tell you exactly how they work or what they look like. And then the movie itself introduces the quote-unquote graboids in a way that you don't get a full reveal until quite a bit into the movie. The reveal that you do get of the smaller versions of the graboid is actually the graboid's tongue, and the actual creature is much bigger than that. And the way it's kind of doled out throughout the movie, it's the pacing of this movie is perfect. The movie's not too long, it's about an hour and a half or so. Pacing is perfect. There aren't any dull moments, and it stays interesting the entire time. Concept itself was unique. This wasn't a werewolf movie or a vampire movie or something like that. It was something totally new. And the fact that the movie doesn't explain where they came from or what they actually are, because once you get into that, when it comes to sci-fi films, you start digging into, oh, this is where they came from, this is how long they've been here, and blah 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 blah.
What's the name you call those things? Where did they come from?
Huh? I don't know.
You're a scientist, aren't you? Yeah, aren't you supposed to have a theory or something?
That stuff starts to weigh down what's actually good about the movie. You start asking too many questions. If you give too many answers, then it just gives more and more opportunity for questions to be asked. This movie doesn't do any of that. It skips all that crap. Just goes straight into, hey, there's these worms out here eating people, and they just started showing up for some reason. And that's all you need to know. Reason number 2 why this movie is awesome. It's a perfect blend of genres. Tremors manages to balance the science fiction and horror genres perfectly. The movie offers plenty of scares and tension, while still having a sense of humor that keeps the audiences engaged. Characters are likable, relatable, and the performances by the cast are fantastic. Kevin Bacon as Val and Fred Ward as Earl make the perfect duo in a film like this. Their chemistry is awesome. It's really a shame that we didn't get to see more of them together in the subsequent sequels to this film. As a team, they're a perfect match on screen. You really feel like these two guys have known each other for years and they're really close friends. And even though their situation isn't great, they don't have much money. You can tell from the very beginning of the film when they're trying to figure out what they're going to eat for breakfast that these guys just live payday to payday. And they're just really close friends who have a tight bond. Another great character in this film is Burt Gummer, played by Michael Gross, who happens to be the only actor that appears in all of the Tremor films. His wife, Heather, is played by Reba McEntire. They play two doomsday preppers who are pretty much ready for anything.
Magazine! Yeah!
When the worms show up, it's kind of right up their alley because they've been preparing for something disastrous to happen, even though they had no idea it would be giant worms under the ground. The rest of the cast, although not as fleshed out, are just as interesting. They've got great dialogue, great scenes with each other, and you're really not rooting for any one of them to die. And that's something you don't see enough of in films these days, where the entire cast is likable characters, especially in a sci-fi horror film, because typically there's one or two characters that you really want to see die because they're just kind of mustache twirling villains. Tremors isn't like that. All the main characters are likable enough to where you don't want them to be killed. Some of them have to be, obviously, or it wouldn't be much of a movie. But that being said, you like everyone. And that's something that's missing these days, where there's just people in movies that are just there to die. And Tremors isn't like that. Along with a great cast, Tremors manages to perfectly blend sci-fi and horror and comedy, much like American Werewolf in London.
You will have long blonde hair, big green eyes, world-class breasts, ass that won't quit, and legs that go all the way up.
It's just that perfect balance. It's not a comedy, but there are funny scenes in the film, and it's humorous. It's kind of a lighthearted movie. There are scenes of tension that are done perfectly. The sci-fi is done pretty much perfectly. You're giving a creature that has no known origin, and the characters are trying to give their explanations of where these things maybe came from, why they're around. None of it honestly matters, but it just makes the movie more interesting. And it's just that perfect blend of sci-fi, horror, suspense, comedy. And this movie just does it excellently. Now let's get to the third reason why this movie is still excellent. It has exceptional visual effects for a film from 1990 that had a pretty low budget. Practical effects used to create the giant worms are truly impressive. The monsters are convincing, and the way they move and interact with the environment feels real. The use of miniatures and forced perspective shots adds to the overall sense of scale and helps to sell the idea of the monsters being huge. Watching this movie, you can tell that the effects are there. It's not like they're completely invisible. But when you have good practical effects, you're able to suspend disbelief and just be kind of sucked into the moment of the film. You have to remember that Tremors came out a year before Terminator 2, which revolutionized practical and visual effects with a much higher budget. But I will argue that Tremors is still a more watchable movie. I'm not saying that Tremors is a better movie than Terminator 2. I love Terminator 2. But Tremors is a film that I can kind of put on and watch any day of the week, or just have it on in the background. It's just that kind of a fun movie, and the effects are perfect for a movie like this. Reason number 4. Tremors has a great soundtrack. The music in Tremors is another aspect that helps to elevate the movie. The score perfectly captures the tension and horror of the situation while also having fun and adventurous feel to it.
Too much pole vaulting.
It has a Western sound to it, like an old Western film, and it fits the scenery and the location perfectly. Desert town in the middle of nowhere, tumbleweeds and stuff, and the soundtrack fits this movie perfectly. I would argue that this movie wouldn't be half as good if it had some corny, generic, low-budget film soundtrack. So this movie has a very distinct sound. I would know that this film was on TV by just hearing it. Without hearing any of the characters' voices, I say, oh, Tremors is on, because it has a very distinctive soundtrack, and it's awesome. Now, number 5. Tremors has a timeless quality. This is a movie that has stood the test of time. It's a film that could be enjoyed by both new and old audiences alike. The movie's original concept, excellent visual effects, and fantastic soundtrack make it a classic that will continue to be enjoyed for years to come. This movie is endlessly rewatchable. And I say that about several films. Films that aren't necessarily good, but are just a really good watch. Like Commando. If you break down the plot of Commando and some of the things that happen in that movie, it's really not a good movie. But the movie itself is awesome. And there's a distinction there. Tremors is one of those movies where, hey, the plot and the writing and the characters, it's actually good. But you combine that with a great sci-fi plot line, great soundtrack, great humor. It's a movie that you can just kind of watch over and over again, put it on in the background. And that's what gives it that timeless quality. There are movies I enjoyed watching when I was a kid that were old black and white films that my mother loved when she was young. Because some of those movies were just timeless. A movie like Them about the giant ants. I used to love that movie when I was a kid because my mother loved it. Tremors is one of those movies where when I'm in my 40s now, my mid 40s, so when I'm in my 60s or 70s and I'm like, man, this movie's still good. A younger generation could be watching it like, wow, this movie's really old, but it's still pretty good. And that's difficult to say about some films that we see these days. There are some great Marvel movies that will be great for years, and some of them that will look terrible in years. Tremors is one of those movies that will just kind of live on forever, and I love it for that. So in conclusion, if for whatever reason you're watching this and you've never seen Tremors, please find it. However you need to watch it, please do yourself a favor and watch this film. You can see the subsequent sequels. I believe they're maybe on like Netflix or something. Not nearly as good. Part 2 isn't bad though, I will say that. The sequels aren't all terrible. They're more like along the line of the sci-fi asylum movies with a slightly better budget and acting and script. So they're like a step above the asylum movies, but not that many steps. But the original is the OG. And it is almost there at GOAT status. This movie's excellent. Like I said, highly recommend you watch it. It's a great time. Like I said, if you've never seen it, sit down with some friends, have some drinks, enjoy a good, fun, dumb sci-fi movie, and just have a great time. So once again, if you like this review, leave me a like, subscribe to the channel, and please come back for more. Thanks for watching.